First of all, I want to ask everyone to be professional and courteous to our speaker and others. Be courteous to your colleagues. So turn off those telephones. Put it on silent. Let's not hear anybody get beeped. So let's not see anybody get up and start talking on their phone. So I appreciate your cooperation with that. To give you a little sense of the type of company that is SVMIC, it's a physician-owned company. They were founded and they're managed by doctors. So they understand your life. They understand what it's like to be in your shoes. They have a board of directors who are doctors, and they all make critical decisions about setting malpractice rates. So it's by doctors, for doctors. They're very proud of their strong legal defense, which is provided to their insured physicians. They exist to aggressively defend you when you need them, and you will need them. They have a collaborative claims process where each claim is managed by an in-house attorney together with a local defense attorney. And they're the only malpractice company that encourages its members to engage their claims attorneys anytime at no cost to you. So we have some of their key staff here with us today. I want them to raise their hands. Mr. Jeff Woods, JD, who is Director of Risk Education in the back. Julie Loomis, RN, JD, Assistant Vice President for Risk Education, and Debbie Hudson, Business Development Executive. Debbie, if you have any questions about anything, find Debbie. She will have the answer. If you're moonlighting, as some of you do, and you have a policy with this company, you're going to receive a 10% premium credit for attending today's program. So be sure that you signed in on the GME list and also the SVMIC sign in so you can get that important credit. Going to be talking about physician burnout today. It's a pervasive problem that you hear a lot about. It can impair clinical competence, it can shorten careers, it can distress families. Burnout's an independent predictor of reporting major medical errors and being involved in medical malpractice suits. Today's program is going to address the ways to enhance your well-being, to combat burnout, and find meaning in medicine. Just a personal note, I've been doing this for about 35 years, and there's one young resident that I will never forget. This story is probably 8, maybe 10 years old now, but this young resident appeared for orientation, like all of you have done. He had just graduated from medical school a few weeks earlier, brand new MD after his name, very likable, handsome, bright young man, great future, played football on his college team, had everything going for him. Last day of orientation, he came to us and he said, "You know, I just can't do this. I can't do it." And he dropped out and he left. Now that young man had burnout real damn early, but he had burnout. I don't know what happened to him in his career. I did hear that he got a position somewhere in research, and I pray that he's doing well. But he was an early victim of burnout, and we don't want that to happen to any of you. We need you. We're going to be 100,000 doctors short in a few years. So your value, just pure economics, your value increases by the day, and we need you, and we need you to be well. So you're going to hear about that today. Our speaker is Dr. Kevin Klauer. He's a board-certified emergency medicine doctor who was recently appointed CEO of the American Osteopathic Association. He's a clinical assistant professor at Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine and the University of Tennessee Health Science Center College of Medicine. He earned his DO degree from Des Moines University College of Osteopathic Medicine and his executive juris doctorate degree with honors from Concord Law School. I just met him. It's a pleasure to have met him, Dr. Klauer.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the kind and warm introduction. I will tell you that this is a bizarre arrangement of people right here. You have fear in the institution, don't you? That is not a positive thing for burnout. There's a lot of room up here, and this is not like SeaWorld. You will not get wet. You will not get splashed. But if you feel comfortable where you're at, you can certainly stay there. But the first comments I will make is that this should really be an interactive session. We should talk about what you want to talk about. Certainly I brought some slides. If this ever becomes about a bunch of slides you can read, then I need to sit down, I need to print these out, hand them to you, and you can read them, and then we can go to lunch. So this is about having a conversation with you, because I'm certain you've heard about the concept of burnout before, right? This is one of our very first interactive moment. You've heard about burnout. Okay, so you've probably been talked at before regarding burnout. You probably have a fundamental understanding of burnout. Have you taken a look at the recent literature regarding burnout? That's what I've done with you for today. It's kind of assembled what I think is important out there. It's across different specialties, but the concepts translate to, I think, all specialties to really give you a sense of what's out there. Is the evidence incredibly strong? Not necessarily, but there is empiric evidence to show that there are negative consequences from burnout. There are effects to all of you, and I don't think we need necessarily randomized controlled trials in burnout to prove that this is an effect that's important to everyone. And it has the negative effects, including in risk management, et cetera, that we would be worried about. So that's what I'm going to do, but I didn't bring 2 hours worth of content regarding slides to recite one slide after another. So I want to make sure this is interactive in one of two ways. Either we go through the information that I prepared for you, and then we can have some discussion, lock the doors, and make sure that you can't leave before a certain time. That's one approach. The other approach is anything that you want to talk about along the way, we'll talk about. And whenever we're done, before, at 12:30 or before, we'll be finished. Does that sound okay? Either way is fine. So we'll let you kind of conduct this and however it goes. If you have a burning question, we'll stop and we'll discuss it then. Yeah, I think, honestly, this will be a better experience for you if we're addressing what's of interest to you and what's of concern to you, more so than if I recite a bunch of data to you. Although I want you to have the information so that you have it. Because I think probably once we heard about burnout and you're all busy, we stopped listening to a certain extent about how the database on burnout is evolving, and it is evolving. All right, so let's just for now have you review some of the objectives for today we're trying to accomplish. And this also does very, very conveniently meet your ACGME requirement on burnout, which is nice for you. Are you excited about that? One and a half of you are excited about meeting the requirement. Take a look at the last two. Can anyone see that from back there? Because you are way back. If you're up here, I wouldn't be asking the question. What's the second to last one? And the last one? Those are the most important. And it may sound cliche. It is so true. I will not share all of my experiences through leadership roles in medicine. But this becomes a very sad discussion when you think about the careers that have been ruined and, most importantly, the lives that have been lost. And nobody says, yeah, you know what? I thought they would have committed suicide. Gosh, I guess it would have said something because I thought they were going to do it. We're all surprised, right? When a colleague cannot cope any longer with all the stresses on them from a variety of sources, none of us believed that we really truly knew or we would have intervened. And there's so many of these stories, individual stories that I have with individuals that I wish I had done more with, individuals that I did do things with, and individuals that I know other people have told me about that they wish that they had done more with as well. I have a colleague that knew that he had a conversation with someone, they were struggling, and when he was working a shift in an emergency department, in the last several years, his trauma resuscitation a couple days after that dinner was the person he was having dinner with. Do you think he will ever be the same? I'm not going on until we recognize this is an interactive session. Do you think that emergency physician's life will ever be the same? That person could not be resuscitated. Does he feel responsible? To a certain extent, he does. Should he? Absolutely not. He did not cause this. He was not in a position to necessarily identify that this would have happened. Nonetheless, everyone is surprised. So if we can not get to that point in the first place, we'll be in a much better situation and we can hopefully save some careers and save some lives. And today what I want to do for you, hopefully, is have you recognize this early in your career. Of course, the downstream effects of burnout are really, really important. We don't want to lose any lives, but we want you to have a happy and fulfilled career. This is going to be so easy. How many of you want to have a happy and fulfilled career? It's like 7 of you. The rest of you are like, no, I want to continue this pain and misery. This is what I want right now, the life of a resident. So do we have all residents in the room? Where are the attendings? Okay, we have one attending, okay. Any nurses? Physician assistants, advanced practice registered nurses, okay. So pretty much all residents, right? Okay, great. Just want to know who was here. So it's important to recognize this. And I will tell you that some of the data here began with Tate Shanafelt out of Mayo Clinic. Have you read any of Tate Shanafelt's work? It's really good work, and I tell you, the first thing to really recognize is this quote that comes from this first article in 2012. Burnout is more common among physicians than among other U.S. workers. Physicians in specialties at the front line of care seem to be at greatest risk. And that's shuffling a little bit, but it absolutely seems to be the case. So those who are working in critical care, high-pressure specialties, emergency medicine was at the top of the list forever, but it seems to be shuffling a little bit lower now. It doesn't matter. The key to remember is every single specialty has significantly high rates of burnout, and it is substantially higher than your counterparts out of medicine. That's enough. We don't need to say, oh, are we number 1 this year? That's not the top of the list you want to be on. But that's not what's important here. What's important here is we recognize it's ubiquitous in medicine. It's ubiquitous with all clinicians, but particularly physicians, probably because of the level of responsibility that we have. And it needs to change. It absolutely needs to change. And the rest of the world does not experience this level of burnout. So this next article, when you take a look at it, reflects a lot of data. But really what it points out is Tate Shanafelt looked at burnout across many physicians. I think it was over 30,000 surveys, but it was I think a 19.2% response rate. Is that a great response rate? Nah. Did it get published? It did. There's valuable information. Survey methodology has its limitations. But they found in 2011, 45% of physicians reported at least one symptom of burnout. And in 2014, doing it again after education of the community and being out there, 54% reported at least one sign of burnout or symptom of burnout. So that's important. We were going the wrong direction. So is it perfect? Is it perfect research? No. Do we need more perfect research to recognize that this is a problem for all of us? Absolutely not. Have you felt pressured at some point in your career at this point? At some point? Anyone? Yeah, so you know that this phenomenon exists. You don't need additional data. I will share a little bit of some of the Medscape data that's out there, and just to give you a sense of which physicians are most burned out. And again, you can see the list. I'm not going to run through the list with you. But the most important point is, even if you go to the lowest end, and this always surprises me, plastic surgery. And the one that came out in the 2018 data, which is a complete data set. The 19 data came out recently, and I will tell you who's the top of the list for burnout at about, I think it's about 54%. Who is at the top of the list right now? Urology. Is anybody going to do a urology fellowship in here? You're going to do that. Yeah, the only thing, you tell me if I'm right. Let's have a one-on-one conversation here. I've seen that number creeping up over the last several years, and part of me says, I don't know. If I was on the business end of a scope in a urethra all day, every day, yeah, I would absolutely be at risk for burnout. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know. So, but nonetheless, there are stressors that appear to be greater with some specialties than others. Which physicians experience both depression and burnout, which is really important. And we'll talk about some data. I'm going to foreshadow this a little bit. Is depression different than burnout? It is. It is. Is it because that's true or because that's what we were told? I've got an article I'm going to share with you a little, but I'm not so convinced they're different at this point. It's how we frame it. But take a look at those who were diagnosed with depression but also have burnout. There's at least a corollary here. Anybody in OBGYN? Yeah. So you're all together. Well, see, that's good. That's a good start. You're working together, but you are isolating yourselves, though. So you're together as a team, but you've isolated yourself from the other teams. What's happening over here? You're bringing babies into the world. You should be happy, but the stressors that probably impact you are professional liability, the potential bad outcomes that can happen, a lack of prenatal care, and your work responsibilities when you can't control the volume. Does it get difficult when you have multiple precipitous deliveries going on at the same time? Yeah, it's kind of cool at the end of the day, but during it, it's kind of chaos. So I can kind of understand that. So what contributes to physician burnout? Take a look at the areas. And the reason I mention this to you, I think it's valuable information, that we absolutely want to recognize what are the triggers for this, what are the contributors to this so you can potentially avoid it. Some of it cannot be changed. And that's why, I'll be honest with you, I don't like the term burnout. Does that make you feel good? If we label ourselves as burnt out, is that a badge of honor? No, it doesn't sound very good. And so I don't like the term, but I will tell you the reason I think the term will stay around for a long time is I've had some discussions, and we'll talk more about it a little bit later, with Christina Maslach. Do you know who she is? Have you ever taken the Maslach Burnout Inventory? Some of you have. The three of you, you're at risk. The three of you need to do it. Maslach Burnout Inventory. This is what was developed in the mid-'70s that is still today the preeminent tool used to assess for risk for burnout or actual burnout. Well, I didn't even know if Dr. Maslach was still working in this area. I reached out to her to see if I could do an interview with her, and I've got part of it recorded that I want you to listen to in a little bit. But just what is her perspective now? And it was near the end of 2018. So in 2018, what is your perspective on burnout after all of your great work? And one of the questions I asked her was, Dr. Maslach, isn't burnout a bad term? And she said, Kevin, it's not. And I said, well, tell me why, because it doesn't feel right as a physician. And she said, because when I interviewed person after person after person, the term I chose, which was burnout, was because that's the word that every one of them, and they weren't linked together, they didn't know each other, that's the term they used. I feel burnout. I'm burnout with this. I know that I'm burnout at my job. I'm burnout at home. It was universally the word that all of those people used when I interviewed them for my research, and it was their word, not mine. So I think it will continue to be the prevailing term out there, but it's not intended to label us that we are something less than. But what I don't like about it, even if we have a good explanation for it, is where does it point the finger for the source of burnout? Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, not that you are personally burnt out, but you're right. So burnout, that's labeling me, and so the source is with me. So how many of you believe you can cure burnout with yoga? Mindfulness, better eating, slightly better rest. Alcohol, perhaps. Not a good coping strategy, but frequently used. Anyway, so burnout is an important term, but we have to make sure that we don't look at it as a negative thing. So how do physicians cope? And we just mentioned a few things there, but there are multiple coping mechanisms. Exercise is probably a good thing. Talking with family members and close friends. Sleep is a good thing. Sleeping too much is a bad thing. Not that you'd be allowed to do that. How many of you are sleep deprived right now? Remember, there's an attending in the room. You raise your hands. Yes, we're totally sleep deprived. We are very focused on our training and education. Absolutely. So I think you probably are, and you may continue to be for quite some time. And you can see some of the areas too. And looking at, again, 22% use alcohol as a coping mechanism. I won't ask you any personal questions. Do you know, raise your hand if you know anyone who drinks alcohol. Yeah, okay, so you do. But, you know, certainly it's a recreational type of thing. It's fun, whatever, it's fine. No judgment here. But if you're going home and drinking alone because you don't like what happened during the day, and that's what you do, and you find it happens once a week, then it happens 3 times a week, and now it's just what you do at the end of a shift or at the end of a, your call day or whatever it is, that's a problem, and that will not lead anywhere good. It's an escape, and it's not a healthy one. So just think about your coping mechanisms and decide if you're being healthy, because you want to do this for a long time. How many of you would like to practice medicine for 10 years or beyond? 20 years. Answer, no. 20 years, no. 40 years, let's just jump at 40 years. 50 years. How many, it's interesting when I talk to physicians that are saying, listen, I used to do a lot of education in board certification in emergency medicine and in board preparation. And at the beginning of those courses, we would always ask, how many of you are doing your first recertification, your concert examination? A bunch of people raise their hand. How many people are doing their second continuous certification or recertification? Then a bunch of other people would raise their hand. And you finally get to there were actually people who had done their 3rd recertification and people who are preparing now to do their 4th recertification. Can you imagine? Those are 10-year certification cycles. So If you want to have a happy, healthy, fulfilled career, and you don't want to work for an extended period of time, then you need to do it well. You need to do it well with financial planning also along the way so that you have options, you have choices. Financial pressure will absolutely burden you. How many of you know somebody within your training system that probably is spending beyond their means? You've ever heard of anybody in graduate medical education spending beyond their means? Hey, I did, and I tell you what, it was bad. It wasn't disastrous, but it was bad. Delayed gratification. 4 years of medical school, I went to a 4-year emergency medicine residency at Charity Hospital in New Orleans. I had something owed to me when I was done, and so did my wife, and now we're going to get stuff. Well, I found out pretty quickly within, 2 years after my training program that I loved my job, but I asked myself one day, what if I decided I wanted to take a month off, or 6 months off, or travel, or do a sabbatical, or whatever, go to the beach for an extended period of time and learn to surf? I realized I couldn't do it. I loved the job, so I wanted to do it anyway. I didn't want to take the time off. But I wasn't only working for me anymore. I was working for my stuff. My stuff owned me. Because those payments had to be made. People were relying on me. And this is the weight that we put on ourselves that adds to all of this, that really can begin to topple our house of cards when we think about burnout. There are things we can control, there are things we can't control. If you spend beyond your means, even if you have the cash flow to support it, if you're reliant on that cash flow and that paycheck every month to make sure that you meet your financial obligations because of your choices, you are going to feel pressured. You're going to feel the burden, more so than other people will, and you are at greater risk. I've seen so many people, and I will tell you, unfortunately, so many suicides when you track it back, that there were interpersonal conflicts, whether it be divorce or something else. There were financial conflicts. There were burdens. There were pressures. Oh, by the way, the stuff that we do is really freaking hard. And your training schedule is really, really hard. And you add this other stuff on top of you. So I divested myself of those things and made my life easier. My dad taught me, and it took me a long time to listen to this, is that money isn't important except that it buys you options, it buys you choices. If you have saved some money and your things don't own you, you have the option to choose which directions you want to go in your life. You don't like your job? Then resign and look for the next job. And you don't have to have the next job before you find that, before you resign, if you have prepared. When you have the power of choice in your life, that can absolutely buffer a lot of burnout. It really can. All right. So how many of you exercise? Let me ask that. In some way, shape, or form, other than at work when you're walking the halls. Okay, all right, great. How many of you are taking the stairs when the elevator is immediately available? Yeah, take the stairs, absolutely. So that's good. So exercise is good. All right, and also, what would reduce burnout? Well, and this is, kind of goes nicely with the data that was shown earlier about some of the stressors. Administrative burdens are huge. You can't necessarily control them. So if we could manage some of those things, work schedule, call hours, government regulations, more reasonable patient loads, lots of different things that might be contributors, but we don't necessarily have the ability to individually influence. But the point I'm making here is there are individual strategies, things you can do for you. We've talked about some of them. And then there are things we need to do at the system level, at a hospital system, nationally, whatever it is. If you look at the data on burnout, where is the greatest impact seen? Individual intervention or system-wide or systematic intervention? Yeah, system-wide. What can we do to make things easier? And of course, it can't be simply, we would just like to work less hard and we would like to work less hours. Well, that doesn't meet the mission of the organization. We have to figure out how to work smarter, not faster, not harder. We have to make it easier while we're still meeting the needs of the mission and we're still meeting the needs of the patients in our communities. But it doesn't mean that it all has to rest on your shoulders. There have to be ways within the organization, and it can be driven by some of you to say, you know what, if we just did this one thing, if I had my schedule 30 days in advance, I could plan. It would be easier. If we had flexible scheduling, so when I have a life event, a family member is sick, or a child has an important event I need to go to, that someone can cover me and I can do that, I would feel better and I would feel less stressed. Do you have those things? Anyone? Has anyone ever heard of those things? Well, these are the things that are noted out there that can be helpful. Are they difficult to implement? Yeah, some of them are. Are they impossible? Absolutely not. Are we willing to make the commitment to do that? We have to really decide if we are or not. So I want to talk a little bit about, we're giving right now, I should have mentioned this early on, we're talking kind of about the background and what's going on in burnout. Then I want to talk about some of the effects and some of the solutions that may be out there. And this article, again, from Tate Shanafelt, and there are several articles that I'm going to mention from him, but this one really speaks about medical students and residents. And during the introduction, it was a very heartfelt story about a resident who was burnt out. And I think it's important to recognize that burnout can happen at any phase in your career. It's not owned by any one class of clinician or owned by any one class of physician. So there are some people who believe that, well, you're a medical student, you can't be burnt out. Well, burnout is a function of two things. Really, it's a function of all the things that weigh on us that we can control or maybe cannot control and influence how we respond to that. And the other factor is resiliency. How well do we absorb it? So you may be incredibly resilient, you may be less resilient, it's not a judgment, but if you were exposed to the same stressors, then one of you is going to do better than the other simply because one of you is more resilient than the other. There's your own personal resiliency. Alcohol does not help resiliency. Exercise and health helps resiliency. Taking time off and those type of things when you need it are really helping your resiliency. So think about that. So I'm not going into the details about Tate's article except that he said several things, but medical students are known to have significant amounts of burnout. Absolutely they are. And do you note as well that, fascinating fact, that PGY1 residents, when surveyed, are less satisfied with their work-life balance than PGY2s and 3s. Profound, huh? How many of you loved your first year? How many of you are in your first year now? And you don't have a reference point now, but it will feel better next year. And this is the beginning of your first year, right? So how's the first month going? Good thumbs up from one of the 5 in the focus group over here. So great. All right, well, this is one of your toughest years. It's really busy. It's great. And you will learn an awful lot. I tell you, I remember in my first year, and at Charity at that time, we worked 24 shifts a month in the emergency department. I remember, and we worked 12-hour shifts, so I couldn't remember anymore if I was working day shifts or night shifts, and I'll tell you why. And this was probably not a good thing. I would go home, whether it was a day shift or a night shift, to get something to eat, I would go to sleep. Then my brain would debrief from all of the chaos and all the crazy things and all the good things I learned through the course of the shift. And I would wake up not feeling rested, wondering, was that the shift or did I did not know if I was coming or going. And especially, that was my first year. So there's a lot, but you can learn a lot from it too, but make sure you take care of yourself. This is an article that was written by a gentleman that I had write a column for me for ASAP Now, which is a publication I edited for 6 years, but I just stepped down from that role. But I thought it was fascinating. So he was an emergency medicine resident, Ben Thomas. He graduated a year ago, I think. So he is also a great medical photographer. So he talked about burnout, the patients he saw early in his residency, and how difficult it was to see loss of people and to not be able to help when he thought he was trained to take away the pain of others, and sometimes he couldn't do it. So we published this. I thought it was beautiful. It was great. Well, somebody then sent me a letter to the editor, and I went ahead and published that too, not because I think it's valid, but because it shows the perspective of people out there. It's maybe a little fuzzy, so I'll read it to you. The account of Dr. Thomas is very moving and insightful. He should have stopped there. Moving and insightful is positive, but it isn't burnout. He's not even out of residency. This is a matter of questioning the appropriateness of his chosen field. If you don't want to deal with death on a regular basis, then ophthalmology or dermatology might be a better choice. So I'm sorry, I didn't write this. How many of you are an ophtho or derm? How many of you agree with that statement? If you don't want to be burnt out, you go into ophtho or derm. I don't know. That's pretty inflammatory to them. Anyway, or perhaps even a field outside medicine. Burnout begins about 15 years into your career when you are indeed physically worn down, when you realize that the head of your ER group is not at all concerned with standing up to the administration on your behalf, but is interested only in maintaining his or her hospital contract, which could mean throwing you to the wolves if it's expedient. Wow. Is this gentleman burnt out? Totally, you are. But why do you own it? Why do you take license of burnout and you minimize the experience that Ben had? Ben experienced burnout. And we all experience burnout to certain degrees at some point. How resilient are we, and how can we bounce back from this? But the point I'm making here is Tate Shanafelt, with his survey, recognized that even early on in medical school, people are burnout. Our training process fosters this. And residents can be burnt out. You don't have to be a seasoned and hardened and negative attending to claim burnout. This is way beyond burnout. This is grumpy and burnout. Burnout doesn't mean that you're not a nice person, that you're grumpy, or you're intolerant of others. I think all of that is noted in this person's letter. All right, so this is some data, and I didn't specifically emphasize emergency medicine, but there was a lot of data on it. But there's emerging data in other clinician types and also other specialties. But it was kind of interesting in emergency medicine well-being and stress and satisfaction in this article from 2000 and 2014. So again, this was important in recognizing what the training experience was regarding well-being and burnout. And so they stratified a random sample of emergency medicine residents from PGY 1, 2, and 3, and I mentioned to you a bit of the study findings earlier. But also, I wanted to emphasize what were noted as coping mechanisms. Residents reported exercise, 94%. That's great. Didn't quantify or qualify what that was, but it was exercise. Hobbies, 89%. Now, hobbies can be good, but this survey didn't have them discuss what their hobbies were. I'm certain that there are very positive and constructive hobbies. Needlepoint is probably a good hobby. There are probably some hobbies that are not good hobbies, but they occupy your time. So be careful of your choices. And alcohol, 71% in a survey. Freely sharing your information. Do you use alcohol as a coping mechanism? Bam, yes I do. 71% in 2014. That's dangerous. Some of the hobbies may be dangerous, but I can tell you, some of the people were referring to alcohol as their hobby, I think, and that's not a good thing either. You shouldn't be good at alcohol. That's not something you should make as an activity. It's certainly not a coping mechanism. All right, so a little more data here as well. So this is from nursing information. So a systematic review of 25 years. On the average, 26% of emergency nurses suffered from burnout, and this translates to other forms of nursing practice as well. But when you're at the front lines and there's a stressful, chaotic environment, emergency medicine sometimes lends itself to some of this burnout research. And work-related factors such as exposure to traumatic events, job characteristics, and organizational variables were found to be determinants of burnout, which is really, really important. So let's emphasize those. So traumatic events, well, we all experience those. And they're educational, but they weigh on us. We are people first. We are physicians second. So when you take in the pain of others, that affects you. And it's okay that it affects you. You have to embrace that. Job characteristics, some of it you can change, some you can't. Organizational variables, we already talked about some of that. If we look a little bit higher in this abstract, individual factors, demographic variables, personality characteristics, and coping strategies were also predictive of burnout. So there are certain things, certain attributes we have that lend us to a greater likelihood of being burnout. Know who you are, know how resilient you are, and know what we should change in our environment. And probably the biggest take-home message from this article is, know that you're a person first. How many of you feel it is a sign of weakness to show compassion to patients? How many of you feel it's a sign of weakness to cry in front of a patient or an attending? Come on, seriously? I'm not buying that for a second. I was trained in that way too, in that type of environment. And the minute you hold somebody's hand, you decide not to resuscitate them, you turn the lights down, you turn the monitor off, and you let the family know, you know what, it's better that we just let you have valuable time with your family member and not do all this medical stuff. It's a touching moment. It's a sad moment. You see the loss of a child that cannot be resuscitated. How could that not impact you? And so my point is, if you ever thought that you were instructed somewhere along the way to not feel the pain of others, that will make you less of a physician. You feel the pain. If you want to do it privately, you do it privately. If you want to share that grief with others, you do it. There's nothing wrong with it, and it is entirely unhealthy not to do that. Well, no, I'm a physician, so I rise above that. I'm not emotional about this. Well, yeah, in the middle of a resuscitation, let's try to see if we can keep it together a bit. Absolutely. But when you can compartmentalize things then, but when you step away in your debriefing and you need a moment, take a moment. If that moment includes tears, use them. If you need a little more time, or you need to talk to people about an event, then you need to do it. But we haven't been good to each other to recognize that. But we're people first, we're physicians second. World Health Organization took an important step. Did you hear about this in May? Recognizing burnout as an occupational phenomenon. Now, they specifically stated it's not a mental health or behavioral health issue, which I think, as we talked about a little, we foreshadowed a little bit before. Is it different or the same as depression? Well, at least it's recognized, and I won't read this to you, but basically you can see that they've characterized what burnout is, and this is recognized as an occupational phenomenon, which puts the emphasis and responsibility back on the employer to help change the environment. Will OSHA get involved? Maybe. Will this also have other impacts for a better work environment for you? It really might. I am going to emphasize the 3 bullets. Interestingly enough, they got so smart, they were able to define burnout. They said, feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. What does that sound like? EE, emotional exhaustion. Well, Christina Maslach's been talking about that for decades, so they didn't come up with this. The next one, increased mental distance from one's job or feelings of negativism, cynicism related to one's job. What they did was they just expanded the definition of depersonalization. That's what we talked about a little bit ago. No, I'm a highly trained physician. Therefore, I'm not emotional about any of this. Why do we want to depersonalize ourselves? Don't you provide the best care for people when you're also caring for them interpersonally and you're connected with them? You can't let all of it crush you under the weight of your emotions. That's not what I'm saying. But to completely insulate yourself from any feeling is silly. And then reduced professional efficacy, which is basically the same thing that we've heard for years, which is professional accomplishment. Do I feel like this is meaningful? And this is at least what we found a bit in emergency medicine. If you look at the literature in other specialties that are high chaos and high volume, is that a lot of people, even if they're in horrific environments, if the job's worth it, if it's really rewarding, that helps their resiliency. So if you're in a horrible environment, but you feel like you're doing great work and you feel great value for the effort you're putting in, that goes so far to mitigate the possibility of you feeling or being burnt out. It doesn't take it all away. But if you're working in an environment that's horrendous and you're not empowered to do anything positive and you don't feel like you're learning and you don't feel like anything positive is coming out of it, that's the worst possible combination. But I will tell you, if you feel like you're doing good work for people that's important, you're connecting with people, it doesn't matter if the physical plant is beautiful. It doesn't matter if you get enough bathroom breaks, because what you get to do for people in your lives is so critically valuable. You walk away from every day saying, I made such a difference. All the rest of it just melts away and doesn't matter. But we'd like to have it to be more utopic than that, but it's going to be really important. And I think, again, the World Health Organization taking this step is important. I think they plagiarized a little bit, because all they really did was reword these 3, which is what we really do know about. All right, and this may at some point dovetail into the American Disabilities Act. Right now, if you have a protected disease or illness, you have diabetes and need an accommodation, you have substance abuse, you have depression, you can't be terminated. You are protected in those classes to make sure that you're not discriminated against. Well, I'm very suspicious that if this evolves further to include burnout as possibly included with a mental health component, it could be included under the American Disabilities Act, which would give all of us protection then to say, you know what, I'm feeling burnout, and my work performance or my lack of ability to come in the last 2 days was because of this. I've had it diagnosed and I have it, so you can't fire me because of it, because it's part of my disease. And I think that would be a helpful thing. I will also state, this is important, this quote, I won't read it to you, but from the ADA, the actual act, that when depression or some other medical illness or substance abuse or dependence becomes disabling and you need protection for that, that's fine. But what some people who have gone to that extent don't realize is that if you are still engaged in the illegal use of drugs, which is pathologic, it's part of substance abuse and dependence. It's not necessarily your fault or the fault of that person, although there's some choice involved there. The point I want to make to you, if you ever find yourself in your career getting to the point where you're burnt out, now you're feeling stressed and anxious, now you're coping with alcohol, and now maybe you're coping with some other substance, and you're doing things that are not appropriate to get those substances. Well, will you get protection under the American Disabilities Act? Maybe. But you won't if you're still doing illegal things. So if you want protection under the American Disabilities Act, you have to say, yeah, I illegally diverted things because I have this problem, but I'm not doing it anymore. But if you're still in the act of doing illegal things, you are not afforded protection under the American Disabilities Act in that regard. I just want you to be aware of that, and some people haven't realized that, and it's cost them even careers. Okay, so this article I think is important, looking at factors related to physician burnout and its consequences, and again, emphasizing those three areas. And I think I liked some of these articles because if it emphasizes the areas you need to be thoughtful of so that you can construct your own career, your own bubble of resiliency around yourself, you can know what can I affect, what can I not affect, what do I want to get involved in at the institutional level, do we need a committee, do we need a task force, can we make things better? Because when we are better, and we have better mental health, we're going to take better care of our patients. So work factors, a loss of autonomy. If you're concerned about medical malpractice risk, how many of you are concerned about getting sued at some point in your career? and then OBGYN, right up again. Yes, well, yes, you've absolutely been indoctrinated into the risk in OBGYN. But we all, I think, as you evolve into practice, especially when you get out of your training institution, you start to realize that you bear the burden of that risk. And not that that can't be mitigated. We can have a different discussion about that. It truly can be. But that's a concern. Everyone like the EMR that you have, that you're working with? You like it. You know, it's fascinating that when EMRs became more popular, there were a huge number of people, and those people still are in the workforce, that don't like them. They said, I know what it was like before. What we have found, and what I've personally found in recent years, is that a lot of graduating residents are interested in what EMR the facility will have based on what they've used before and what vendor they like, as opposed to, oh, do you have to have one? And you become, when you have trained, and you're training now, you have trained in an electronic and digital environment. So you've accepted the technology, but I will tell you that it does provide some encumbrances, and it does provide some limitations to how much time you can spend at the bedside. Clearly, EMRs take us away from the bedside and they put us in front of the computer. That's not a positive thing. That's not a positive thing at all. Do you know how many mouse clicks it takes to document one medical record for an emergency department case for right upper quadrant abdominal pain? 260. It's crazy. So there have been some interesting time studies done and some interesting studies about workload and what we do. Particularly, well, there's some in emergency medicine. There are a fair number in internal medicine and a little bit in office-based practice to show that, yeah, maybe the electronics help facilitate billing and coding and charge capture and those things. Do they translate to better care? Not necessarily, and they take us away from the bedside. So I think EMRs, although you haven't known an environment without one, it does add to your stress to a certain extent. And also, it's prompted us to spend time at home on work-related activities. So, again, don't want to ask any personal questions here. How many of you know somebody at this institution that doesn't complete all their charts real time and takes their personal time to log in later and edit, sign, and finish records? Yes, but not you, right? You're doing all of yours immediately. I get it. So you're not doing yours. So in the back row, okay. But the point I'm making is, it's the only, and I used to dictate a lot of, almost all of my charts at the end of the shift. It was extra time, but I felt comfortable and relaxed because the only thing I could control in the practice of emergency medicine, the only thing that I felt was under my control was the paperwork. So if I could be faster, quicker, and feel like I did a better job and take the pressure off during the shift, I was willing to devote an hour or two after or whatever it took. Was that a good use of my time? Maybe not, but it was for me. But now what we've done, we've used the electronic capability of the EMR to do the same thing and say, well, you know what? The only thing I can control, I could do all this paperwork or this electronic work at the same time in this charting, or I could stay at the hospital. I'm not going to do that. I'm so tired. I'm going to go home and I'll do it this weekend. What have you just done to your work-life balance? You just added more work to the work-life balance. Now it's shifting significantly, and that's not a good thing. So be careful about letting work encroach into the life part of the work-life balance. Personal characteristics, those who are self-critical, have you ever met a physician who isn't self-critical? I never have. And it's to a varying amount of degrees. There are some people who are less self-critical that, no, I'm very good at what I do, and I don't believe that I could make a mistake. There are those people who are only minimally self-critical. But I think the vast majority of us are really critical of our own performance, and we are crushed when others are critical of our performance. I know you felt that. you're going through rounds and you misspeak or you didn't know an answer. And at least when I trained, I don't know if it's the way when you were training, that was the purpose. You're going to be asked questions until you don't know the answer. That was the entire purpose, to let you know you had more to learn. And it wasn't right. I don't know if it's happening now. I think things have evolved away from that, but nonetheless, we tend to be really self-critical. Engaging in unhelpful coping strategies, sleep deprivation, overcommitment. Is anyone overcommitted with your time schedule right now? Anyone? How about the first years? You feel overcommitted with your schedule? You got all the time you need to do whatever you want? I don't know, you are not. You do not realize this is an interactive session. Do not make me come up there because I will do it. If you won't come down here, I will go up there. So don't overcommit. Perfectionism, we're all perfectionists to a certain degree. And again, you know, we have to try and maintain this work-life balance. And we need a support system. If you can't get it at home, if you're single, you're moved away from your family to come to this program, then you need to do it within your resident group. Talk about things. Talk about your experiences. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger. Organizational factors, again, negative leadership behaviors, workload expectations, insufficient rewards. Again, if you feel like what you're doing is important, you can bear a heavy, heavy burden and workload. Limited interpersonal collaboration, limited opportunities for advancement and social support, all those things. And I wanted to read them so you can hear them out loud. These are the things you need to be thinking about personally, and also from a work factor standpoint and in your institution. How can we make this better? Because I want, although the vast majority of you, it looks like, wanted to work maybe 20 years and that was it. So I want to get you to that year 20, and if you want to go a little beyond, I want you to have enough fuel in the tank to get there, okay? All right, this is also it is nursing data, and this is interesting, I believe, because it really talks about how the work environment and the different dimensions that we've talked about of burnout are impacted by the workplace and workplace violence. So I will go through these definitions. So CS up here is compassion satisfaction. That's compassion fatigue. I don't like the term compassion satisfaction because it's inversely accurate. It's about compassion fatigue. You understand, or you experience so much negativism in the world and so much pain and so much suffering that at some point you just become numb to it, which leads then to depersonalization. And if you have secondary traumatic stress, when we experience those horrific events that other people go through, we consume them in part as our own. Do you remember, how many of you were in your last year of training? Last year? Okay, sir, you are burnout. Am I in my last year? Because I don't know. I'll just keep going until they tell me to stop. Let's keep going. Are you the guy they just keep adding years on? You're not quite done. We just need to have you keep going. Well, anyway, so it sounds like you're about done. Do you remember that one really, really tough case? If you had to say, if we all went around the room, we're not going to do any of this, okay? But if we did and we said, listen, tell me about the most difficult, challenging case you ever had. One comes to mind, right? It sounds like multiple come to mind. I should not have used you. I want everyone to hold hands and gather around him. And we're going to give you the social support you need. But no, I think we all do that. I can still remember a few of those where it's like, wow, they're tough and they were tear-jerking moments and they challenged me. Maybe it was good and maybe some of it wasn't good. But when you internalize that, it is really, really, it takes a toll on you. You're experiencing what they experienced. And then BO is not body odor. I don't know why they use this particular acronym in this article, but it's burnout. It all leads to burnout. So what at least in the nursing world, what was associated with this? So patient violence, non-physical patient violent threats. Has anyone ever been yelled at by a patient? Or all your patients in Chattanooga? So very nice. They're kind, they're appreciative, they look you in the eye, they bake you cookies the next day after you've cared for them. That always happens, right? You ever been called a bad name? Anybody ever said anything racially inappropriate to you? Anybody not recognize you as a physician because you're a woman? This is all very, very negative stuff. And it's nonviolent, but it's damaging. It's damaging to us when it happens. And take a look at this. This was absolutely, it absolutely impacted their compassion, satisfaction, etc. So general threats, name calling, threats of lawsuits, that keeps coming up as a common theme. Tolerance to violence. I want to really anchor on this for a moment. If an institution, and I don't know what you do here, so I'm not indicting anyone's practice, but I think all institutions need to do a better job with this. And the point I'm making is, if you are working in a care environment, it doesn't matter what it is, and a patient is unreasonable, they spit. Has anyone ever been, anybody ever spit at you? Anybody ever been assaulted by a patient in this institution? Yeah. So what happens all too frequently in healthcare is people go, oh, well, yeah, but they're a patient and they're intoxicated, or they have behavioral health or mental health problems, or they didn't understand. And you're a healthcare worker, so you should understand that you can rise above this. Let me ask you I will ask you a personal question. How many of you have gotten a moving violation in your vehicle? So the rest of you have never gotten a ticket. I'm calling BS on that. What would happen if, when the lights went on and you pulled over, you got out of the vehicle and you met the officer halfway to their car and said, hey, and dropped a couple F-bombs and spit at them? Do you like voltage? Because it's coming your way. You will be tased now. You are going down. How come that same exact behavior is acceptable when it's perpetrated against all of you? Even sometimes when law enforcement says, yeah, but we're in the hospital and that's a patient. Are you kidding me? The crime of assault and battery, assault is making someone fearful you're going to hurt them, and battery is actually unwanted touching. It doesn't matter where it's at. If somebody does that to you, the institution should have a mechanism for you to report it. And furthermore, they need to mandate that you report it so it's not a personal choice. Because then it becomes personal weakness. Oh yeah, well, I couldn't deal with it, so I decided to report it. Look, we all do this, and they ran to administration with this. It shouldn't be a personal choice. If it happens to you, it needs to be reported, and administration needs to do what they're supposed to do about it, which may even include calling law enforcement. And there are some places where I've seen it where if the staff was anywhere assaulted, it maybe has gone even too far the other direction. I'll tell you what, when I trained at Charity, and this just came back to memory, the staff there was very, very respected by the New Orleans Police Department. There was no way we were ever getting a ticket or anything in that city. I got pulled over a couple times. The lab coats in the back. No, they knew that if anything ever happened to them, they were coming to us. I will tell you, if anybody did anything to any of us and the nurses, even attack anyone at Charity Hospital New Orleans within that building, because there were police officers everywhere, it was just step back. It was probably over the top, but that was too far the other direction. But we were protected. But I don't think that happens everywhere. We felt safe and protected, and because we were in an environment where that was going to be done. But I think it needs to be standardized. Do you feel safe in your workplace right now? You're safe. Thank you. You're safe, you're burnt out, you don't even know when you're... Do you have a graduation date scheduled, or it's just gonna, whatever? It's tentative. Oh man, you are funny. You're not drinking also, are you? Let me just throw that out there. Don't answer that. Do not answer that at all. So anyway, so times have changed also, but I think we need to have a standardized approach. If a standardized approach would benefit you here, it's something you can bring up. But it shouldn't be a personal choice about reporting it. That's what I really love about this particular article. And even the nonviolent threats are really important to us. I have a list from this article about many things from 2016 which are really triggers and influencers and prompters of burnout. But the ones I really want to share with you, perceived threats, patient violence, medical malpractice, medical error. How many of you are worried about doing a procedure wrong or a bad outcome with a patient, or discharging someone home with a misdiagnosis? Does that ever enter your mind? If it doesn't, you're not challenging yourself enough. You're not self-critical enough. Have you ever called a patient later thinking that, wow, I need to check on them because I'm not comfortable with the way that ended, or the discharge, or I'm just concerned? You ever call a patient after? Partly because you feel good about checking in on people, and partly because you're worried you didn't do a good job. You ever done it? I've done it. And it's a nice thing to do for people, but it's also, you know, you're kind of doing it for yourself as well, because you're worried that maybe in your crazy work day, maybe you didn't do everything that you wish you had when you thought about it again. So think about these potential threats. Make sure you compartmentalize the threats so they don't take over your lives. All right, and this is, again, just emphasizing medical malpractice. This particular article from 2013, I'll just share the quote with you with some evidence and data that they looked at. Physicians who had medical malpractice experience, so they had been sued, had higher levels of burnout in emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment, or a lack thereof. So if you get named in a claim or a lawsuit, you are more likely to be burnt out than people who did not get named in a claim or a lawsuit in all three of the domains that contribute to burnout. Not surprising. You're safer and a bit insulated here, but you will think more about this, I think, when you graduate. But there are ways to negotiate through this and navigate through this. Having a good partner like SVMC that has your back, that support you if you do have a claim is really important. Giving you tools and education to make sure that you can avoid the claim to begin with is really, really important. And so those things are critical. How many of you are in surgical subspecialties or general surgery? We have no surgeons in the room. Well, OBGYN, yeah. Anyone else? You forgot you were a surgeon. I'm just kidding. Well, anyway, this is about surgery. So recent malpractice suits were strongly related to burnout and depression and recent suicidal thoughts among surgeons. You know, I thought was really impressive, too, in this article, with multivariate analysis, both depression and burnout were independently predicted by the single factor of medical malpractice, to the point where the odds ratio was 1.27 for depression and 1.168 for burnout. Does everyone kind of get the whole odds ratio thing? Do you want to talk about that for a minute? You don't want to talk about that at all. OBGYN says no. Anybody from derm or optho? We already talked about them. No, but just understand, you know, a 1 means whatever, and we'll talk about it for just 2 seconds. So I think oftentimes nobody wants to talk about some of these statistical analysis sort of things because we feel like we should know them. We should be automatic scientists because we're physicians. That isn't the case. Look at your odds ratio. If it's 1, then whatever influencers or factors you were testing are not likely to impact it negatively or positively. If you have something higher than that, that's your percentage amount above it. So if you have an odds ratio of 2, you're twice as likely to have the thing you're looking at based on the factor that you thought was an influence. If it's 0.5, you're half as likely, 50% less likely. So these numbers are important. And you take a look at these and, well, it doesn't really matter. That's 1.168. You know, that's almost 17% greater risk of burnout. That's a lot. It really is. So that's a significant amount. The other thing, too, is sometimes people really focus on the p-values, like where the red lines are. I would say p-values, you can read some information on this. If you are having trouble sleeping, read the actual research that's been done on p-values. Put you to sleep like a baby right now. But the point is, when I trained, I thought, wow, look at that p-value. That's the best study ever. That's the best correlation ever. You either have statistical significance or you do not, based on your methodological design and where you set your sample size and where you set where your p-value should be. If you exceeded it, it doesn't mean it has a stronger correlation or it's more statistically significant. It doesn't mean anything. It's not how p-values work. P-values are incredibly overrated. And also, the other factor that I'll share with you is p-values talk about statistical significance. They have nothing to do with clinical significance. So sometimes you'll see an article like, wow, the statistical significance is great here, look at the p-value. Yeah, but do we think what they proved has any true impact to a patient? And I can't think of an exact corollary right now, but there are many articles that have been published that way, particularly with new pharmaceutical agents, where it's like, yeah, but this was your outcome, and the outcome was statistically significant, but your outcome is clinically irrelevant to what we would use the drug for. Doesn't make any sense. So just be aware of that when you see some of these numbers. So I'm sorry that was like maybe a minute and 15 seconds of the 3 of your lives you're never going to get back again. So I apologize for that. Okay, the two-way street concept is this. We talked about it. So medical malpractice causes burnout or an increased risk of burnout. Will you concede that fact with me? Yeah, it's a stressor. It's a big-time stressor. Would you also agree, because the data does support it, and it does support both ways in these articles, that when you are burnt out, do you practice differently? If you have emotional exhaustion, you're depersonalized, you don't feel like what you're doing gives you professional accomplishment, do you think you provide the same quality of care? I need an answer from you. No, you don't. And so those who are burnt out produce more medical malpractice and more medical errors. They do. Statistically, it's accurate. It's been validated. That happens. Does everybody who's burnt out produce those? No. Does everybody who gets sued get burnt out? No. But are there strong correlations both directions? Absolutely. So burnout is a patient safety issue. It's not a I'm working too hard and I'm not resilient enough and I'm too soft. That's not what this is about. If the workforce is burnt out, you're less efficient and patients will be harmed because of it. And that's the reality. Something else I want to mention regarding medical malpractice, and I think this is my last comment about medical malpractice. Would that be okay, unless you want to talk more about it? Is that, and this article emphasizes it, but there are others as well. There's something called the second victim. So if you ever are named in a medical malpractice lawsuit, yes, the person, if you truly committed negligence, and negligence is not intentional, it happens, maybe the right things didn't go the way, or the things didn't go exactly the way you wanted to, and the care didn't go exactly the right way, and maybe there's a bad outcome. And maybe there is a victim from the alleged negligence. Maybe there is. Maybe it's nobody's fault, and that person's victimized from their disease or their injury, but you just happen to be at the wrong place, at the wrong time, which is at the bedside. That happens more often than the other form. But I will tell you, there's another victim, and it's you. And we're starting to recognize this with some of this literature, and in this article in particular, that when you go through a medical malpractice lawsuit, it's hard. It's really hard. It takes, from the date of the occurrence, it takes about 36 months, 3 years, for about 96 to 98% of claims to be filed. It takes another 3 years then, on the average, to get about 95 to 96% completely adjudicated and resolved. So from the date you saw somebody and something might have gone wrong, you're not done with this for 6 years. That's crazy. It's really hard. So when you go through this process, and this has been proven in the literature, that even if you are vindicated, you go through this process and you even go to trial, you defend yourself, and it's a defense verdict. So you go back to baseline, right? No, you've been victimized, you've been harmed, you've been emotionally damaged from the process. You're never the same again if you don't manage this and don't have the right support. So the second victim is you, and we want to make sure that we support you. All right, so here's an article from 2016, again, Shanafelt and his friends from Mayo Clinic, but talking about EHRs and computerized physician order entry, really important. Not a surprise that physicians who use EHRs and CPOE had lower satisfaction with the amount of time spent on clerical tasks and higher rates of burnout on univariate analysis, meaning they looked at that one variable and decided, was that the reason why they were unhappy? So are people unhappy with what EMR does to our workflow? The EMR pulls us away from the bedside. And even if you have, a computer on wheels or something, or you can take a laptop in, do you have those? You have mobile workstations? You take them into the bedside? If you do, still you're distracted and still you're disconnected from your patient. If you always have to leave and go out and sit at a workstation, that's even worse. So what this article says is that people are not happy about this, and it does contribute to burnout. I won't spend more time on this because we talked about it in more detail before. And I really like this article from New England Journal, 2018. And I just wanted to share 3 quotes with you. This is about redesigning care to restore meaning and sanity for physicians. And I love articles that are self-explanatory in the title. If it tells you exactly what they proved or exactly what they believe they found, you don't have to go much further. Well, you do. You read it to validate what they found. But I think this is one of those descriptive titles, and it's really important. And here are 3 important quotes that I think should resonate with you. We're spending our days doing the wrong work. And that's what Christine said, who was in this article. The wrong work. What is the wrong work? Is the wrong work delivering a baby? No. Is the wrong work, I don't know what other specialties, urology. So is the wrong work, doing a cystoscopy and diagnosing a bladder cancer? No, that's the right work, okay? The right clinical work we're doing, but all of this other administrative burden, all the charting, all the EMR work, everything else we have to do, is that really the right work? Is that what you went to medical school to do and are training to do? You're being taught to do that, but that's not the art of medicine. That's navigating through our complex healthcare environment. It's a necessity, but it's not the right work. I don't have a solution for you. We've got to make it better, but nonetheless, acknowledging it is important. That, maybe sometimes we're spending a lot of our effort not doing the right work. But when we are doing the right work, you've got to celebrate it. You've got to be excited about it. So, and this one came from Tate, but physicians are working a staggering number of hours at night, and this has enabled organizations to continually increase productivity targets without changing the infrastructure or support system. Basically what he's saying is now you're doing your work after hours, you're doing it at night, other businesses don't stay open 24/7, but yet we've been able to do it with the same workforce and the same number of people, largely, and we've just added the workload to all of you. That's at some point, we will break the workforce over this. And this last one I really like as well. Physicians with symptoms of burnout are more likely to report having made a major medical error in the past 3 months and to receive lower patient satisfaction scores. You don't like what you're doing anymore? people are going to know it. And you're not going to be nice to people. When they need something extra, particularly the interpersonal things, you're going to feel disgusted and it's going to come out. How many of you do not have a filter, either verbally or with facial expression? Yes, I saw at least one hand. And if you're having a bad day or you're having a bad week or it's just been a bad career so far, every time somebody annoys you, it's an eye roll. Somebody, you believe that an expectation is unreasonable, it will come off as inflection or in tone. And it's not a good thing. And the most important thing, I mean, we want to have a good relationship with our patients, but this statement is important, that many others have identified and have proven that you're going to create medical error if you're unhappy. And that's not what we want to do. It really is not. Okay, so this next article, really short, but it's really about this concept of resilience. I really want you to focus on this. I love this article from 2017. So here are the results. 283 doctors were included. Mean resilience was 68.9, which is so much higher than the general population. Our resilience at baseline is a lot higher. And I think it's due to the factor I mentioned before. If we were doing some other line of work, I don't want to call it any other particular line of work, and it just really wasn't rewarding, then all of the pressure that goes along with that job wouldn't be worth anything, and it would just, all of it will weigh on us. We have a lot of pressure on us, more than most, but the rewards that we get, primarily in what we get to do for our communities and for our patients, and we also have economic reward. We are rewarded for our training and our expertise. We're rewarded in a lot of different ways. That gives us a lot of resilience. So 37% of doctors had high burnout, 72% doctors had high secondary traumatic stress, 24% had low compassion satisfaction, despite the fact that we are off the charts with resiliency. So when people say, just get tougher, when I trained, I just sucked it up. I just learned to deal with it. You know what? You're already resilient. Despite the fact that you are resilient and it's proven in the literature, you still have high levels of the 3 different domains that contribute to burnout. So there's something else contributing to this other than your own lack of ability to cope and your own lack of ability to bounce back, which is resiliency. Yeah, you want to be resilient, but we can't point the finger, as you said earlier, to ourselves and say, we are solely responsible for addressing our own burnout. It's my issue because I'm not resilient enough. No, we're totally resilient, but we have these factors that are influencing our lives that we cannot control. And I like this article, and I think I put in the thing about a new spin. I think this is kind of a new spin, and I included it because it's a new perspective on burnout. Role strain and role conflict. So role strain is, I have a role, and I don't have the resources to do it right. How many of you have been working clinically, and you felt like you didn't have the bed capacity, didn't have the nursing support, didn't have the supplies, didn't have the OR time, didn't have the tools? At some point in time, you felt, I could have done a better job had I had better resources. Anybody? It happens in every hospital. It's not a negative thing about being here. It happens on busy days. That's role strain. I know what my responsibilities are, and I will execute on those responsibilities for my patient, but I can't because I don't have everything that I need. That's role strain. And then role conflict is, I have multiple roles. So I have multiple roles, and I need to do this role and this role as well. So how many of you have children? Okay. How many of you are thinking about having children? How come nobody over here has children, and everybody over here, the majority over here have children? And the 3 OBGYN people, you all have children? No, just you, okay. Well, the point is, do you ever find, and I will come to you, and that your role as, I think, it hasn't been verified yet, your role as a senior resident comes in conflict with your role as a parent? Are there things you miss, things you can't do? I know you're trying hard. I'm not saying you aren't doing the best that you can, but there are days that you feel conflicted that I should have been there for that. I wish I could have done that. It was the right decision because I'm training as an OBGYN, and I'm great, so I needed to do that. I'm not qualifying the decision. I'm just saying, do you ever feel conflicted in those roles? Yeah. That's role conflict. And we have role strain and role conflict. You're pushing yourself toward burnout. That's what I talked about regarding the scheduling piece that has been mentioned in some literature that's out there. It's emerging literature, but we need to be doing things like flexible scheduling. We need to be there are different terms out there in the literature, but having life event flexibility. So if I don't know how can I ask how old your children are? 5 and 3 months or years? Okay, so if your 5-year-old is having a ballet recital, wouldn't it be nice because he or she may not understand that your work that you're doing it for them and all the right things, wouldn't it be great if you could, with flexible scheduling and life event planning, that you could get 3 hours of coverage to go to that ballet recital and get a picture with her or him, so when they're 20, they know you were there. Despite how busy you were always there. If we just do those things, they're really helpful, and it helps remove the issue, a bit of role conflict. Okay, all right. And in the area, largely in the area of what's going on in the environment, I'll share this story with you. How many of you have filled out a licensure application, or you have filled out a medical staff application and had to answer a question? Well, let me reword this. How many of you have seen, I'm not asking how you answered it, but how many of you have ever seen a medical staff application or a licensure application asking you to comment about whether you've ever had mental illness? Have you ever seen that? Well, if you haven't, you have not ever applied for privileges at a hospital, or you are not licensed in any state in the United States. Because this is a standard question that's out there. And the question is interesting because they don't talk about every other illness out there. So what they're trying to get to is, are you incapable of performing your job, or do you need accommodation? That goes back to the 3 letters I talked to you about before, the ADA, the American Disabilities Act. Do you need accommodation? Well, a friend of mine in emergency medicine, and she's been public about this, so I'll share this with you, Susan Haney. She is such a courageous person. I was talking to her at a conference a few years ago, and she told me her story that she was going to Oregon. Well, let me go back a little bit. I'll foreshadow a little bit. She said, Kevin, you know, I wrote an article about my circumstance. I submitted it to JAMA, and they declined it, they rejected it, and I'm just I don't feel like there's really a place for this. And I said, tell me the details, more of the detail than I already know, because I think your story is more timely now than it was when you submitted it before, and I think people need to hear it. Here's what happened. So I think she was working on, I remember exactly where, I think it was the East Coast, and she wanted to get a license in Oregon. So she submitted her license. She had a license in the state that she was primarily practicing in that was completely unrestricted. She didn't have any issues, okay? This person has no issues. She looked at the application for Oregon and said, have you ever had or been treated for mental illness? She has a history of anxiety disorder. I mean, not a big deal, never impacted her practice, never anything else. Why should they know? It's none of their business. But she complied with the application. She said yes. Well, the state of Oregon, which she fought for a decade, then said, well, you know what? We're not sure what to do with this information. The only mechanism that we have in place for mental illness is for substance dependence. We don't have an anxiety arm to treat you, so we're obligated then, since you answered with a positive response, that now you will do random drug testing. Because we have identified this and we have put a restriction on your license, that now needs to be reported to the National Practitioners Data Bank. What happened to the other state licenses she had, including her home state, by her applying to Oregon? They now both sanctioned her. So her home, and so everyone now has her on some restricted license because what? She was honest? And why should anyone care? The question should be, are you able to do the job you're being hired for, or we're giving you a license to do? And if you can't do that, can you do it with accommodation? Otherwise, it's none of your business about my personal life, my mental health history, or anything else. But nonetheless, this is out there. What I love about this, you won't see this, I can send it to you if you want it, but this article was published by the Federation of State Medical Boards. I loved it, and actually talked to one of their leaders last month, and I said, you know, I looked at your article from 2018, and I want you to know your work product is making a difference. Because at least where I came from and where I am currently, I'm using that information to change what happens to clinicians who apply for privileges at hospitals or licensure at a state. And what they said was, and this is more important, this is a blow-up of the more actionable piece of it, they really said that you need to be taking out those sort of questions. In other words, I'm not going to read this to you. You should be taking those questions out. So back to Susan's story, I mean, it's just crazy because no one wanted to hear her story. We published this, and it was not a positive thing toward the State Medical Board of Oregon. It was, I mean, it's her perspective. They may have a different perspective. There was such an outpouring of support and expression of emotion for her online and otherwise. She felt completely lifted and elevated by this whole thing. She thought she was going to be embarrassed, but thought she needed to tell her story. And everyone just rallied around this woman, and it has prompted change. Others have picked up on this story. It's fascinating. So I just wanted you to be aware that what can happen out there, and and the environmental influences that can be negative. And I would also say, be a little cautious. It's a little bit of a side note. Be cautious in what you say in those applications. You have to be truthful, of course. Always be truthful. But if the information is, if the request is not clear, or you are going to you're going to describe yourself in a disparaging light, which is not germane to the question, don't put a bunch of additional information there. Because someone may interpret it the wrong way, like what happened with Susan. It was horrible. And she's still getting through this professionally. But could you imagine, because you have a history of anxiety disorder that you were never hospitalized for, you were never, you never had any major issue with, now you're submitting to random drug tests in 3 different states? I mean, that's just crazy. So don't let that happen to you. And by the way, I was hoping this would be an uplifting discussion. I know at this point you're like, please let me out of here. This 2-hour discussion about burnout is contributing to my burnout. It is, I understand, but hopefully it's creating some awareness. So I'll let you read the cartoon, but basically, if we manage this, we don't have to be victimized by the circumstances we find ourselves in. And I think burnout, we talk about burnout, but we don't talk about the pathway it leads to. If you just stay forever in burnout, I think you'll be unhappy. You might be physically harmed from it medically, I think long term. But what can happen is it leads to depression. It leads to anxiety. And then your coping mechanisms may be off. Substance abuse dependence and suicide. It's really important that we recognize that this is where it goes. And like, all right, burnout is just part of being a physician. I can live with this. Part about being a resident, I'll live with it. No, it will lead you down a path that doesn't end well. And it's not good. Almost 17% of those who seek treatment for addiction have already attempted suicide one time. Were you aware of that? That's not exclusive of physicians. That's all people. So if you find yourself addicted to something, you're at great risk for attempting suicide, and I hope you're not successful. All right. And specifically with physician suicide, just sharing a couple articles with you. The one on the right just speaks to the current statistic that we know out there. As far as we know, we're losing 400 lives a year to physician suicide, where this became really, really recognized in the mainstream lay press is this article on the left, where in New York City, there were 2 residents, I think they were in internal medicine programs, different programs, within 2 weeks of each other, jumped off roofs and committed suicide. They didn't even know each other. And they believed this is due to depression and burnout. They weren't even related, and they weren't even in the same programs. It's not like it was a pact for suicide. They were completely unrelated. This happens. We don't need this to happen to any one single individual, and we can't lose 400 physicians a year. And I think it's important to recognize that. And I just want to share some personal thoughts with you about this, and the people that I've talked to, the people that I've had a chance to help, and the people that I didn't, and others. And I've heard a lot of negative things about suicide. I mean, it is a negative thing. But what I've come away with are some of these thoughts. If they don't resonate with you, you dismiss them. But if it helps you to understand where this person is at a little bit, and after talking to a lot of people, this is what I've come up with. The pain of living is greater than the prospect of giving up. When you're making that decision, they have decided it is just better to not be here. I mean, that is a horrible state of affairs. Some people say it's an act of cowardice. I certainly would say it's not the right decision. Tomorrow will always, if you're at rock bottom, tomorrow has to be a little better if you can just wait. But I don't think we should say, well, it's an easy way out, it's an act of cowardice. It's an act of desperation. I have nowhere else to go. I have no value. I have no worth. The only solution I have is to just not exist anymore. The pain of living is too great. I don't want it anymore, and I have no way out. And again, as I stated, an act of true desperation that can only be fully appreciated by the person who is experiencing it. So when people say, oh, yeah, it's sad, but you know what, I can't, that's just kind of a cowardly thing to do. You don't know how far this person was backed up into a corner to the point where they're like all of us, but they made a decision it was better to just not exist. I mean, contemplate that for a minute. That is horrible. And those who succeed, they can't tell their stories, so we don't get to hear this information, ever. It's gone. And when we do get to talk to some of the people who really intended to successfully commit suicide, but they weren't successful, this is the kind of stuff you come away with. And the vast majority are glad they weren't successful. Lost stories are lost opportunities to understand, but I wanted to share these thoughts with you so you can have maybe a different perspective about this. You have a colleague that commits suicide, and you're like, oh, well, so they're not like me now. Oh yeah, they're just like you. They just got further down the road and they felt that there was no way out. You might find yourself in that same situation at some point. It's a horrible situation. It doesn't make them less than. It just makes them have significant depression that needs to be treated. And aren't we really in the business of saving lives? This is the rally point for us. What do you think? I think we are. So we're in the business of saving lives, bringing new lives into the world in this row right here. But you know, what's sad is, what about these lives? What about you in this room? What about supporting each other? We're so busy taking care of everybody else's medical needs and their glass of water and their blanket and making sure they get a follow-up appointment. And we have 400 physicians killing themselves a year because we can't help them. That's not right. We need to take care of each other as well. So let's make sure we do that. All right, so let's talk about a little more some of the effects. Are you okay? Can you go on with this? I know that it's an emotionally weighty and heavy topic, but I think it's really important. And I'm glad that you're willing to listen to it, although I might have overstated that. I'm glad that you're being forced to listen to this. No, but hopefully down the road, some of this will resonate with you and it will help you to have a happier, more fulfilled life and career. So let's talk about some of the interesting data that's out there. Annals of Family Medicine 2019. So what did they find out about the workforce? So prevalence of burnout, low engagement, turnover very high. 53% of clinicians and staff reporting burnout, and only 32% of clinicians and 35% of staff reporting high engagement. So it's really important to recognize this. So turnover is affected significantly by burnout. This is what resonates with hospital administrators and people in administrative roles. That wow, so burnout affects the workforce to the point where it gets very, very expensive. Shanafelt with some of his other friends published this information. So what are the effects of burnout? So people are burnt out, patient care is affected. The healthcare system has increased cost, reduced physician productivity, there's turnover, there's waste in the system because of this. And then physician health, everything that happens to all of us because we absorb everything that they throw at us because we believe we're expected to, and we're not. It will continue to come our way until we react differently. Now, this is from emergency medicine because I couldn't find another source that did a similar study, but I think it's very telling about how burnout impacts the way we care for patients. So let me just summarize this really quickly. So we're going to look at these 6 different areas, but when you look at red, that's no burnout. You look at blue, that's burnout. Whether you did something or not, frequently or not by survey, it was rarely, monthly, or weekly. Let's go to the far right of each of these and let's compare people who reported burnout versus non-burnout and if they did a behavior weekly. I admitted or discharged patients to make the ED, the emergency department, more manageable. Almost 73% of those who were burnout said they did it, compared to 21% who weren't burnout. There's a huge difference in practice style based on burnout alone. Let's go to the next question to the right. I did not fully discuss treatment options or answer a patient's questions. We won't go over the numbers, but you can see on a weekly basis the people who are burnout are doing this at almost 3 times the rate. I order more laboratory radiology tests because I was so busy. The burnout people are ordering more tests because they're overwhelmed. I did not treat a patient's pain in a timely manner. I did not communicate important information during a handoff. I did not discuss a patient's treatment plan with appropriate staff. All of this is more common in those who are burnt out and doing it on a weekly basis. Yes? Mm-hmm.
So do they have like the lab tests that could be objective? Right? Do they compare this to objective data? Because perception could be that you're not doing a good job, but in reality you may be the same, but you're just being more critical because you're burnt out.
Very good point. So did they compare this to actual ordering data? No. This was survey data. Have you engaged in this behavior? And so you're right. All of this burnout data is not exact science, it's not perfect science, but there is a huge body of evidence that suggests a lot of this exists. So what I want you to come away with from this part of the discussion is, does burnout influence the way you care for patients, and perhaps in a negative way? And when you compare it to people who are answering the same survey who are not burnout, there is a huge difference in the way people respond to the survey. Now, you bring up a good point. Am I responding to the survey in that way because of my own self-perception and I'm devaluing the care that I give? Maybe. But you look at certain things that, that some of these aspects, and it's for every single one of these, I think there's some truth here. So what I would say to you is, do I believe the numbers? No, it's survey methodology, and you've mentioned some of the limitations. Do I believe the magnitude of difference? Not necessarily. What I feel comfortable coming away with is there is definitely a difference in these areas between people who are burnout and not burnout, and we can validate that with other data that has suggested that outcomes are impacted by people who are not mentally well caring for patients, and burnout influences how we care for people, and it influences our mental health. It really does, whether we call it depression or not, and we're getting there, okay? All right, does that answer your question? I appreciate the challenge, because you're right. But the difficulty with this is, too, if we decide to dismiss this data because it's not the kind of bench research you would like to see, randomized controlled trials, well, then we won't benefit from the literature. And I'll tell you something else that's similar. If you look at disparities in healthcare delivery, whether it's because of gender inequality or it's because of race or ethnicity or a variety of different things, the data, again, it's not randomized controlled trials, it's retrospective data. But the massive volume of data that says the same thing about pain management, about chest pain evaluations and gender inequity and all of these things, you can't deny it. Although you can look at one study and say, well, that's not really good methodological design. Well, yeah, but you'd have to get a dump truck to haul away all of the quasi-good data that is all pointing in the same direction. So, yes, follow-up question?
Oh, well, I was just saying, I'm not saying we dismiss it, but what I'm saying is that these physicians perception that they're not doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could somehow use some objective data alongside that, because the perception of you not doing a good job is playing into your not getting that third point of burnout, right? Where
Yeah.
you're not feeling you got a job.
Yeah, personal accomplishment.
Exactly. So, how could you kind of help, if some of these are lies that physicians are believing, how could you battle that with, we like objective data, right? How could
Right.
you help those physicians have this perception that they're not doing their job, and saying, hey, we compared this, and you're not, or hey, be mindful of this, you are burnout. These are things that we have noticed in physicians help you be mindful, help kind of decrease the cycle. I mean, I do believe you're correct in that burnout affects outcomes by all these different things. How are ways that we can take this, maybe compare it with a different data to help our counterparts in battling lies or coping mechanisms of, yeah, you are burnout, here's some things that maybe you should be mindful of, and help them kind of get all that stuff.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. Makes perfect sense. We're in a small enough room. I think you heard her, correct? That if we had objective evidence to support that even their own perception of subperformance or not performing well, that would be even more powerful than them saying, I think I engage in these behaviors. So, yeah, because it may be fueled by their own lack of self-worth or feeling of professional accomplishment, which is the third domain of burnout. So your point is well taken. And I think there's some limited data out there, but there's some emerging data. I thought asking 6 different questions and the weight of this I thought was interesting. And I think we probably all felt that way. You get really busy. So let me ask you this. When you get really, really busy and overwhelmed, do you take care of the patients the same way when it's a really slow day? You don't have the census on no, you sit down, hey, the hospital's half empty, you're on call and it's a holiday and a lot of people got discharged. You spend more time with people perhaps, you sit down, you do things differently. That's what this speaks to. And when you get overwhelmed and you're potentially burnt out because of that, do you adjust your practice style to accommodate for that? Yeah, and it can potentially be not positive. And I know some people that have 2 speeds, on and off. You're either not working at all or you just go 1,000 miles an hour, but we need to modulate that a bit. All right, so let's look at hidden healthcare costs. So again, the article from 2018, again, there are a lot of costs associated with burnout. The cost to the physician and the healthcare system can be enormous because physician burnout is associated with increased rates of depression, alcohol and drug abuse, divorce, et cetera, all kinds of different things. There is a huge cost. And this article, I think, is my favorite that I found from 2018. And I won't read this to you, but I will just give you the background here. So 1948, Life magazine. Has anyone heard of Life magazine in this room? Okay, it was kind of a cool, big Life. Look it up. Google it. It's got to be there. But Life magazine was cool. It's almost like a massive-sized National Geographic thing with really cool stories in it, but a little different subject matter. Really cool stuff. Anyway, they did this story about this physician, this family physician, Ernest, I think it's pronounced Sirianni. And they had all of these images of him, whether he was carrying an old person to the operating room who needed to have an amputation because of a gangrenous leg. He was taking care of a child's eye who was kicked by a horse. He delivered a baby. All of these graphic images of him in his practice. What this article in 2018 reported was, reflecting back on that Life magazine article, this was the life and times of this guy and everybody he impacted. It was so cool. But he had many facial expressions. They said anguish, anxiety, uncertainty, exhaustion, and triumph, all these different crazy, challenging events, but nowhere in the article did the word burnout appear. He felt very fulfilled by his career despite the challenges that he faced and some of the things that were difficult. He provided great service to people and he got great reward. Something changed from 1948 to now, and I think we know it's the burden, the administrative burdens that are on us and regulatory burdens that are on us. It really is. It's at least part of it. All right. And this article, again, focuses on what is happening and what happens with resiliency. And I've already talked about resiliency a bit. Resiliency is important, but it can't be looked at as your responsibility to avoid burnout. Resiliency is a marker of how impacted you are by your external influences. You want to be as resilient as you can be. You want to optimize your resiliency, but it doesn't mean it's your entire responsibility. So again, we know that 400 U.S. physicians die by suicide every year, and I wanted you to see this in multiple sources. There are many other articles that quote the same number. But what's scary for me is suicide rates for male physicians, 70% higher than the general population, 250 to 400% higher for females. I don't know why. I've thought about it a lot, and I don't know if it's other pressures. I don't know if it's gender equity or gender inequality issues that are additional burdens in the workplace. I don't know exactly what it is, but the numbers are real. There have been many, many authors that have validated these same numbers. So women physicians are at much greater risk, and I just can't figure out why. We have to be mindful of it. So I told you that story about one of my colleagues. Yeah, that physician that came in and he tried to resuscitate, she was a female colleague of his. And he just didn't think, and she didn't give him indication that that's where she was headed so quickly. Although she was struggling with a few things, she never gave him, and he's a pretty caring and introspective person. He never thought that in 36 hours this was going to be the outcome. All right, depression affects over a third of physicians at some point in their career, and the whole point of this article is, and I mentioned it before, I'm going to emphasize it now, it's about this thing called the healing partnership. So point number one they make in the article is we are physicians first. I mean, we are people first, physicians second, right? That's the important point. I think when we train, we become physicians first and we forget we're people. Be a person first. Feel the pain of if you, to a certain extent, with the people that you're caring for. This is a relationship between two people. That's the first point. And the second point is being vulnerable, being open, and letting patients and colleagues see your, and I don't like this, it says imperfect humanity. No, it's not imperfect. It's the beauty of who we are as people. That is humanity. It's not imperfect. It's beautiful and it's perfect. We care and we feel. Isn't that why you're doing this? Please don't raise your hand to this question. But how many of you went into medicine for the money? Okay, no hands. Perfect. Exactly. You went into care for people. I was a little worried. Well, yes, I did that. Probably not. And now that's probably the value proposition may not be there as it once was many, many years ago and decades ago. But the point is apologizing, having tears, sharing moments of pain, connecting with people is important. If we can't really foster the healing partnership, our mental health and our rates of burnout will go up and our mental health is going to decline because we separate ourselves from being people when we care for patients. It just doesn't make any sense. And so somebody said it and somebody published it, and it's really important information. And this, now we're going to come to this point that I wanted to make earlier that I foreshadowed. It was a summary of an article that was published. A summary was done in Medscape. And this physician, Dr. Privatera, said, you know what, I don't think that burnout and depression are different at all. I think they're exactly the same thing. But what happens when, and look at Susan's story, so what happens if you say that, wow, I'm struggling with burnout? Okay, we'll rally with you. We'll help you. We'll help you be more resilient. We'll give you coping strategies. We can do whatever. We'll do all this stuff because we all have burnout. What happens when somebody says, I have depression? Is there a judgment? Is there a bias there? Even is there a subconscious or unconscious bias? Oh, well, you have mental illness, or maybe you can't be at work, or maybe I put that on an application and now I'm sanctioned by a medical board. Are there obstacles for you to report depression? Yeah, there are totally obstacles to reporting depression. And I tell you, there is some fairly decent data out there as well that inhibition to report and request mental health services is by far greater with female healthcare practitioners in general than it is with males. Don't know why, but that is the case in the literature. Not my opinion, that's what is out there. And so what this person said basically is the work-related causes of burnout and depression are essentially the same. So how do you get depressed? I got all these financial things that I'm dealing with. I've got life stressors. I'm having relationship issues. It's really hard at work. It's all the same stuff, right? So his first point is we're talking about the same thing, but we're calling it two different things because we accept it if we call it burnout. If it's depression, we don't. And I kind of like his line of thinking because if it gets us to where we need to be, then we need to be honest about it, intellectually honest. Emotional exhaustion is considered the core of burnout. Okay? But when emotional exhaustion and depression are treated dimensionally, you take those pieces and you look at depression dimensionally, which is, it's a continuum. You know, major depression, versus, very well-controlled and depression that is certainly easily manageable as an outpatient are two different things. But when you isolate these things, the correlation of what they are and how they're treated and the effectiveness of treatment has a correlation of 0.8. I think it's a kappa value of 0.8. Which was huge correlation. It's excellent correlation. So the point he's making, which isn't definitive, is we need to get more serious about this. This isn't burnout that, oh, you're just not resilient, you're not able to tolerate things as well as other people are, and this is about you because we're calling you burnout. This may be something more important, that the work environment that you're in, the life stressors, and everything else that is thrust upon us as physicians and other practitioners too in healthcare may be something more important. And if we foreshadow this and dilute it by calling it burnout when actually it may be early depression that's untreated, it's not your fault. And I tell you, if you look at the data in the UK versus the United States, do we have a limitation in outpatient resources for mental health services? Oh, absolutely. Do you have difficulty referring people? We don't have the people. What about in the UK? Is it different? Huge number of outpatient referral centers, minimal number of inpatient beds. The stigma associated with mental health does not exist in Europe. It exists here. If you have mental health, oh, you're damaged. There's something wrong with you. Not if you have diabetes, not if you have heart disease, but if you have mental illness, it's not treated exactly like an illness. There's bias associated with it that is very unique to this country, that is limiting our ability to understand what burnout is. And that's the point he's making, and so I want to come back to that topic. I don't know that he's wrong, and I think we may need to embrace that a little bit. All right, so resiliency training. So I asked a question earlier, at this point, does anyone think you can do this with mindfulness and yoga? No. Is it good to take a few minutes, relax, get your mind straight? Yeah, all that is good. But if we think we can just provide granola in the doctor's dining room and have you take 5 minutes out for mindful meditation and everyone's just going to be happy and go back to work, that is placating the issues. That's not going to be good enough. But they do say that resilience training may be helpful in addressing the unavoidable suffering. But it's the wrong treatment of the organizational pathologies that exist. So you can't do mindfulness, you can't do resilience training if you have a workload that's unreasonable, if you have a work environment that's not safe, if you have safety regarding violence issues that are not dealt with, if you have tolerance of violence in your workplace. You can tell people to do a downward dog and that's not going to get it done. Okay, there's going to have to be something else that happens. I think that is one of the moves, right? I do not do yoga. Let me just emphasize that right now. I'm not a yoga master. So I think that is one of the moves. Does anyone know? No one does yoga here. Okay, I've lost you entirely. Okay, it is. So understand, feel good about this. You only have 14 minutes left. And you can go back to your resilient lives and not consider burnout for a while. But I do appreciate you listening. So what are the overall costs as well? Think about this. Investigators estimate that physicians leave the field, their practice loses $500,000 to $1 million of revenue. And to recruit somebody else costs about another $90,000. Depending on your specialty, it's variable. But wow, that's a huge financial impact. Not that this is all about the money, But this comes full circle. It's about us personally. It's about the care we give. It's about medical malpractice. It's about the cost. Remember when Tate Shanafelt reported those 3 areas? It affects the physician. It affects the quality of care. It affects the healthcare institution and environment, all of them. Burnout is not an individual personal choice or decision or a lack of ability to cope. That's not what this is. And I do like this last statement, but I don't know that it's possible. But this person went as far as to say re-engineering current EHRs will be difficult. But through the article they're citing, in many clinical situations, patient care could be improved simply by de-implementing the EHR. It's not going to happen. But they recognize that this is a contributor to some of the difficulties that we face. All right, and coping strategies, just if there is a medical error or there is what we might believe to be a mistake, you know, having a mechanism, I don't know that necessarily it has to follow this format, but I would say medical error should be disclosed, but it should be disclosed in a way that, first of all, you know it's an error, and it is done through a mechanism established by the facility, so you're not doing it on a one-off basis. And we have to decide whether, you know, how we do this and who's involved and who is best positioned to do it. Sometimes the clinicians involved are not the right ones to disclose the error. They don't have the interpersonal skills or training to do it. It just makes it worse. And let me ask you a quick question, really quick one. Is that okay? Yep. Okay, so if you ordered 650 of Tylenol and a patient got a gram of Tylenol, that's a medication error, correct? Right. Should you report that to the patient as a medical error? What do you think? You say yes. You say yes. Most of you are saying yes, but I'm sure there are people in the room, because I've asked this question many times, people are like, no, it's inconsequential. It's not going to hurt anybody. If you order the 650 and they got 1,000, yeah, it's not going to matter. Joint Commission in 2001, I believe it was, stated that we need to disclose medical error. And what I like specifically about what they said was, it's not up to us to judge what a patient should know. If the care that you intended to deliver didn't happen in that way, they have the right to know, and it's not to be filtered by us, especially to our own benefit. Oh, they don't need to know. Nothing bad happened. Check on them. Are they okay? Okay, then just let it go. We're fine. You can't do that. We have an obligation to our patients to be honest. And if you let them know, hey, this won't harm you, you'll probably just have more pain relief. Actually, I think the 1,000 is a better order. Whatever you want to say. But nonetheless, there are errors that don't create an adverse drug event, but still need to be reported. But there are some errors, you know, wrong site surgery and other types of things that are truly errors that need to be disclosed the right way. But that can be healing for you as well. I like this article from 2015, and I bring it to you today. It's a little bit dated, but it will help you, I think, personally, about how to judge where you are and how you will be happy in your career. So this is basically called the Wheel of Life. Doesn't that sound, Simba is not going to come out here. This is not like the circle of life, but it kind of is. It's the wheel of life. You look at these domains, you know, physical environment, career, money, health, all these different things. Ideally, you would have a score of 10 all the way around the periphery, but that's not realistic, okay? It's not realistic. So take a look at where you are, map it out yourself. And being well-rounded doesn't mean being a 1.5 in every area. You are at so risk of being an unhappy and burnout person here, it is scary. But you want to have some balance if you can and push everything to the periphery as best you can. If you do this exercise with yourself and say, you know what, fun and recreation, I'm at a total 0, I'm doing nothing. But I'm crushing it in career. I'm chief resident, I'm knocking the cover off the ball of my in-service scores, I'm getting everything done, this is great, but I don't have balance. Work-life balance is a real thing, and to be healthy, you need to balance the different parts of your life. So I would do this, and if you don't have this, you can get a hold of me through SVMIC. I'd be happy to send you this article, and you can see the components of it. But I think it's important. And this article talks about a couple different things that are worth mentioning. That healthcare regulations. I would tell you, it's a legal article. The reason why it's important, it came from the legal industry, and they said that a lot of the burdens on us, is this first quote, and I'll summarize it, is because of well-intentioned legislative and regulatory initiatives. People thought if they made us do these things, things would be better. It would be safer, there'd be less fraud and abuse, but we have to do them. Well-intentioned, but ill-informed. And what this author said, and the second part I will read to you, the government traditionally oversees and protects the health and well-being of the American workforce. And what they further said was, why not this workforce? And by the way, if we're creating the dynamic that's making it unhealthy for them, because of the legislative and regulatory initiatives we've put into place, then we must use legislative and regulatory initiatives to help them because we created this. Profound article, probably read by 3 people, but profound article, and it is out there in the database, which is really, really important from 2018. All right, and also from the AMA, some things that they recommend that you could do. So implement a team-based model of care, enhance communication based on huddles, and when you're working, do you get together with your team, your nursing team, your physician team? I know you do rounds, but in the middle of a day and say, okay, let's talk about one educational thing and let's talk about a couple of updates about the patients, whatever you need to. Float pools for life events. This is what I talked about before. Make sure that metrics for success include satisfaction and well-being. What are the metrics of your facility? Does it include your workforce? I don't know if it does or it doesn't, but it should. Develop schedules that are flexible, and maybe you need a wellness committee in your infrastructure. All right, so I talked about Christina Maslock, and my final question for her was, Christina, so tell me, so you did all this work in the 1970s, and by the way, she had to also do another area of study because her professors told her in her PhD dissertation, if you focus on this burnout thing, this isn't even going to be picked up by the, it's not going to be peer-reviewed, it's not going to be picked up by the scientific community, it's not even going to be in tabloids. So she worked on some other things too, but then this became her life's work. And so from the mid-70s to now, what are the big contributors and issues? And I highlighted 6 that are really, really important for us to think about today that's perhaps top of mind for you. And actually, I have the recorded excerpt from this interview. I'd like to take a couple of your minutes, if that's all right, the last remaining minutes we have, and have you listen to her comments directly instead of mine. Is that all right? Okay, let's see if it'll play. If it doesn't, you're out.
The best thing at this point that we've seen is that although everybody thinks of burnout primarily in terms of workload, demands are way too high, too many, too much, and combined with, too few, too little resources, et cetera. And that is a predictor of the exhaustion part of burnout for sure. The research is showing us that there are at least 5 other areas of fit between people and the job that can predict burnout, or if they're working positively, predict greater engagement with work. So those are like, if you keep the demands, the work demands in as one of them, there's 6 different paths, to making some positive improvements in that work environment and the people who are there. So the demands, I said, the workload issue is one. The second one is the extent to which you have some sort of control or autonomy or discretion over how you do your job and what you do. The third one has to do with reward, which is positive feedback, getting positive feedback when you've done good work. And what we're finding is that it's not so much salary or benefits or all those kind of things. It's social rewards. It's recognition. It's being able, that other people notice and you get that feedback for what you do. The fourth one has to do with what we call community, which is the workplace community. And these are your colleagues, your bosses, the people you supervise, anybody that you come in contact with on a sort of more or less regular basis. And here we're finding this is turning into a really big area these days, that if there is a toxic social work environment where people don't trust each other, don't feel that everybody has their back and they have theirs, these others, that there's no support, there's destructive competition, there's people throwing people under the bus, for all kinds of stuff. When that kind of stuff is happening, that in that workplace community, it is deadly. And so again, having a different kind of cultural work environment, social environment is critical. This one has to do with fairness. Whatever the rules are, whatever the policies, whatever, that there is a fair way in which they are administered so that we don't get into these issues of discrimination and glass ceiling and, not treating, people effectively and well. And then the sixth one alludes to something you said, and that is we talk about it as values, but it could be about meaning. It could be about, it's really, why are we here? What is driving me to do this kind of work? what is the passion I have for it? What is the satisfaction, that I feel from having done a good job and help people and so forth. And so if you're working in an environment where those values aren't supported or they're in conflict with other values, and I see that in healthcare, when we get into how many minutes can you spend with each patient, and getting the beds turned and, all the financial kind of thing that is eating into, for some people, the quality of care that they're providing. That can also be a great source of burnout as well. So at any rate, those 6 areas, we have found that when people begin to look into those a little bit more deeply and say, what could we possibly do differently here? Or how could we change some things? And some of these are low cost, under the radar of the administration, things that we can just sort of control and do differently to make this a place that we feel much more pride, happiness, satisfaction, feeling good about what we're doing.
Absolutely important. I never thought about.
Well, so I wanted you to hear directly from her, so I appreciate that, and knowing that she's still doing this important work, and she is the preeminent expert in this area, I thought might be helpful to you. So in our remaining couple of minutes, if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take those. Otherwise, I want to thank you for your time and attention. I know it's an emotionally heavy and weighty topic, but I'm honored to deliver it to you, and I hope it makes a difference for you. So good luck in your training. Hope you do have very fulfilling and happy careers going forward. Have a great day, everybody.